Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 10 of Buha's Block. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by my buddy, Jason Timpf, the host of Hoops Tonight on The Volume. Jason and I have been doing shows now for over 6 months. Time has flown by. I've learned a lot. I've really enjoyed them, and I'm glad to have him on today. Jason, my dude, how are you doing today?
It's good to see you, man. Little role reversal going on here. We actually had
It's
like a
weird.
little playoff. Yeah, I know. We had a playoff strategy meeting the other day with some of the volume higher ups just to kind of go over some stuff. And we were talking about how we're excited to hopefully, if the Lakers can get out of this play-in situation, have you on a bunch more times during the hopefully more than one round, but at least one round of a playoff series, which should be fun. Obviously, we've enjoyed working together over the last 6 months, and finally some more optimistic stuff. You and I have been all gloom and doom for the most part, and you sent me this in your rundown today, and I was completely caught off guard by it. You said that we have the Lakers have the third best record since February 1st. And what's crazy is after Denver's loss last night, they actually have the second best record in the league since January 1st, which is crazy. And I don't think people even realize that.
No, so that's what I wanted to touch on with you today. Like, so the Lakers have this 5-1 road trip. To me, before the trip, I had said it was a show me something trip because the Lakers had really struggled on the road entering this road trip. They had been 12-20 entering the trip on the road, which was by far the worst record among the 10 playoff and play-in teams. All the other 9 teams had been above 500 on the road. So LA goes 5-1. They're now 17-21 on the road. And they're going to end up playing only 40 road games because of a weird quirk with the in-season tournament. So 2 more road games at Memphis and at New Orleans. But LA goes 5-1. They've won 8 of 9 games. And as you just alluded to, since February 1st, they are 20-8. Which is the tied for the. I think Dallas is now tied with them, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not.
And Denver, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so they're right there for best record in the West, right behind the Boston Celtics, in elite company, and yet they still remain in ninth. Like one of the teams we just mentioned, Dallas, they've ascended from in the play-in mix to all the way up to 5th in the West. Yet the Lakers have not been able to ascend, just given the rate that the other 8 teams ahead of them have been winning at. But looking at that stretch of going 5-1 on this road trip, winning 8 of 9, I do want to note that only 3 of those 8 wins have come against teams above 500, and one of those was against the Philadelphia 76ers, who are about 10 games under 500 without Joel Embiid. So that basically 2 of the wins were against teams above 5. We'll say 2.5. So with all that context of just how the Lakers have been playing for the past couple months, how they played on the road trip, how they've been playing just during this last stretch of like 2.5 weeks. What do you make of them? Like, how real is all this? And are they peaking at the right time for the second straight season?
So in defense of the Lakers, I don't think anybody can really pull the whole like, oh, they're beating up on an easy schedule card, because that literally was their issue, was they were losing to mediocre teams. They've been one of the very best teams in the league this year against the best teams. As a matter of fact, a couple of quick stats. They have 17 wins against teams that are in the top 10 in point differential. That is tied for the most in the league with the Oklahoma City Thunder. They've played the 3rd toughest schedule in the NBA this year. They have the 5th best win percentage over teams that are in the top 10 in point differential. They've been consistently really good against good teams. The issue was they were bad against the mediocre teams, and they've kind of taken care of business. For the record, I never really thought that the Lakers were incapable of this type of run. I thought that, we're going to get into it obviously later, but there was a little bit of like a malaise after the in-season tournament combined with some really confounding lineup decisions. And it just kind of put them in a predicament where they slipped really quickly for like a few weeks. It was literally just a few weeks, and it changed everything about the way that this team is perceived. But like, as far as where I rank them, or how much I view this as like real, so to speak, before the season, I had a top tier with Boston, Denver, and Milwaukee, and then like a second tier of teams that the Lakers were in. And I viewed them as capable of beating any of those teams and then probably not capable of beating Denver, Boston, or Milwaukee. I have since dropped Milwaukee into that second tier, but I more or less feel the same. That second tier for me is the Timberwolves, the Thunder, the Clippers, the Bucks, the Mavericks, the Knicks, the Suns, the 76ers, the Heat, and the Lakers. In that tier, I think all of them are pretty much more or less the same. Depending on which stretch of the season, they've looked terrible or amazing, right? That's been kind of the journey with them. And so I more or less view the Lakers in that tier. Their personnel weaknesses are what will hold them back against those higher level teams. But the reality is that as far as the 82 game season goes, they were always capable of being a better team. I think we would have probably looked at them as a 3 or 4 seed had some things gone differently, but it is what it is. I have a couple other stats just to show that the Lakers are better than their record. They are 23-9 in games that involve clutch situations. That is the best win percentage in the league in those types of games. As bad as their defense has been, they've been the 11th best clutch defense this year. So they've been able to get more stops in those situations. And they have the 3rd best offense in the league since January 7th. And since January 7th, that's a 41 game sample size. That's half the season. And they have the 5th best record in that span. So, like, they've righted the ship, but man, did they do a lot of damage. And Jovan, you know what's freaking crazy? If I remember correctly, if you go back to January 7th, I think they were the 9 seed. And so I'm pretty sure they've gone from the 9 seed to the 9 seed in a half season span being a top 5 team. I can't believe it. It's literally crazy.
And now look, I mean, they are within striking distance. People were referencing their half game back of the Kings. Technically, it's a little bit more than that just because the Kings have the tiebreaker on them. So even if they end up with the same record, Kings would be ahead. But they're right there. New Orleans, Phoenix, Sacramento, all 3 teams are within striking distance. I think Dallas is probably going to be safe in that 4-5 matchup. And it's just a matter of what happens with the Clippers and can Dallas catch them and potentially get home court in that matchup. But I mean, I'm with you. I think this is real. Again, I think, like, yes, they were beating up on lottery teams on this road trip for the most part. They split the 2 games against teams above 500 with Milwaukee and Indiana, but they have. I mean, we saw what they did against Indiana earlier in the season, beating Milwaukee twice without LeBron. I thought really showed like there's something about their offense when LeBron is out, and it's not a knock on LeBron because clearly this team needs LeBron to get to where they want to get to, but just the unpredictable nature of the egalitarian offense that they run when LeBron is out, where it's sort of like this 4-headed monster of, okay, you're going to take, like, AD has definitely stepped up and D'Lo has stepped up. And like, those are the 2 guys I look at who take on the bulk of the usage. But just in general, sort of like if those guys, if you're going to double AD or you're going to blitz D'Lo or whatever, then you have Austin stepping up or you have Rui stepping up. And like, just the offensive weapons that they have, particularly in that starting lineup, I think has really showed over the last few weeks, where I want to say it's around like 17, 18 games where all 5 starters are now averaging 17 or more points.
That's crazy.
Which is just insane, right? And they had that game against New Orleans where all 5 guys scored 20 or more, which is the first starting lineup to do that since 1993. So like, just the offensive firepower that they have with that group is incredible, and that's really what they've leaned on during this stretch as they've been a little bit shakier defensively. But I'm with you. I think this is real. I think the Lakers have, to me, I don't know if I'd put them 3rd in like my championship rankings. The way I think I had them 4th entering the season. I had Phoenix ahead of them. You and I went back and forth on Phoenix and why I was so high on them. But I don't know if I'd have them that high necessarily, but I think they could beat any team in the West that's not Denver. I think Denver is a 4 or 5 game series. I think they just will. I think they'll kick the Lakers' ass in a 7-game series. But aside from Denver, I think the Lakers, with or without home court, and most likely without in basically any hypothetical series, like, have a shot. If not, would be outright favorites in a lot of those series. So I look at it like, if they can get the right bracket, and we're going to touch on Minnesota and OKC in a little bit, like, they can go on a run here to the conference finals again and basically have a repeat of last season. And then it's just a matter of, does Denver make it? Can they stay healthy? Can the Lakers? I mean, who knows? Maybe they figure something out and can figure out the Denver offense in crunch time. But we just talked about the starting lineup here. And so with Rui as the starter in this current group, the Lakers are 15-6, and they are 23-11 overall with Rui starting. And that was like random games earlier in the season. Torian missed a couple games. When LeBron would miss, Rui would step into the starting lineup. But that 15-6 record and the 23-11 record, both translate to 58 and 56 win paces over the course of an 82 game season, respectively. So with Rui as the starter, we're looking at the Lakers like potentially battling for a top 3 seed somewhere in that range. And that's of course extrapolating out over the course of a season. I think if he had been starting since day one, you probably shave off a few wins from that, but I think they would be in a better place than they currently are. So going back to, if you could go back in time, like game 1 of 82, Lakers are in Denver, ring night. And if the Lakers could go back and start Rui Hachimura, how do you see the season playing out? Let's just assume like they still win the in-season tournament, same injuries, but kind of re-simulating the season with Rui as the starter instead of Torian. How do you see the season playing out, and how much of a difference does it actually make?
So I do think it makes a huge difference, and I have some numbers to kind of demonstrate that. I think it's a little bit less about the starting lineup, so to speak, as in terms more. I think it more has to do with just the sheer amount of minutes that Rui got. There was a extended stretch of the season where Rui was like a 2 or 3 shift player, and Torian and Cam were Torian and Cam were playing massive minutes, and that's the part that bothers me the most, because like a lot of Laker fans disagree with me, and I also don't think this will happen. But if Jarred Vanderbilt came back and was healthy, I would start him, and I'd start him on the opposing star to start games, because I'm a big believer in establishing rhythm, in making a star uncomfortable from the opening tip to try to set the tone for a lesser type of game. And but at the same time, I would play Rui the same amount of minutes. I would just bring him off the bench and just play him large minutes around that kind of framework. So the point is like, to me, it's less about the starting lineup and more about Rui playing. But here's a freaking insane stat for you. So the Lakers are 7-7 when Rui doesn't play at all, which obviously has to do with his injury, the handful of injuries that he dealt with this year. But they're 2-9 when he plays fewer than 19 minutes. When he plays at least 19 minutes, they're 35-17, which is a 55 win pace. That's what's so freaking annoying about it, because when we came out of the playoff run last year, if you remember, I remember feeling very strongly this way. Like, LeBron and AD and Rui and Austin. Those were the 4. Those were the 4 guys that it was like, these dudes are real playoff hoopers. Between Austin and Rui, they had like something crazy, like a dozen 20-point games. I can't remember. I think Rui had 4, and I think Austin had 8, if I remember correctly. They had big time performances. Rui was massively important in the Memphis series in particular, and obviously they leaned on him a lot in the Denver series. Like, those were the 4 guys. And like, yeah, we could argue about the starting lineup, and I think you and I were both leaning more towards Vanderbilt at the beginning of the season. But like, we always intended for Rui to play a massive role. He was always supposed to be like a 25 to 35 minute guy, depending on the matchup. And that's the thing, is like, when you look at the roster, playing a player who is very clearly your 4th best player or 5th at the worst, playing him fewer than 19 minutes in a 48-minute game 11 times and going 2-9 in those games, that to me is self-sabotage. You were deliberately leaving talent that you had on the roster on the bench. Not just talent, but talent that specifically fit needs for this roster. And like, it just feels like a missed opportunity. And the reality is like, do I think the Lakers are, up in the Denver, Minnesota, Oklahoma City tier if they play the right guys? No. But I do think that they're out of the play-in, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit, is just a completely unnecessary risk. It's a completely unnecessary risk that they have to face now. One last note, the players do deserve some blame. As bad as Darvin has been this year, and I think he's been bad, that stretch right after the in-season tournament there was a lot of lackadaisical play in terms of effort and focus and energy. Now, the counterpoint there is the coach plays a role there. If the guys don't believe in what they're doing and they're frustrated with their circumstance, one of the underplayed elements of this is just how often Darvin tweaked the rotation, which how that affects rhythm. When guys don't know if they're playing, how many shifts they're getting. They don't, like, one week it's all Christian Wood, and then the next week it's all Jackson Hayes. It's like, of course Christian Wood hasn't made his 3-point shot this year, although he's been injured. But like, of course Christian Wood didn't shoot well this year. a week he'd be playing 25 minutes, and then the next week he'd be DNP'd. Like it was so much jockeying with the rotation that it kind of messed with all that. But I do think the players deserve some blame because I thought they relaxed after winning the in-season tournament. But I do think that they'd be out of the play-in if they better managed their talent this season.
Well, and you're perfectly setting me up here because the Lakers went 3-10 over that stretch, and they're currently 44-33. So you take away that 3-10 stretch, and we're just, this is all hypothetical stuff here, but and you can take away, you can pick and choose, stretches for teams like the Clippers had their stretch of, they start 0-5, 0-6 with Harden, and they were basically unbeatable for 2 months, and then now they've been about 500 for a couple of months here. But like, let's just take away the 3-10 stretch from the in-season tournament. The Lakers are 41-23. That is a 52-win pace. So really that stretch of the season, and I know you've talked about it, we've talked about it on Hoops Tonight, like that was the stretch of the season that really killed things. And if you go back and look at that stretch, that was when a lot of the experimentation was happening. That was when the all wing lineup happened. And yes, they technically went 2-1.
Yeah, they beat the Thunder.
they beat the Thunder, and then actually they lost to the Timberwolves, but there was no LeBron.
Yeah.
So that one, whatever, like that was in Minnesota, and then they lost to Boston on Christmas Day. So they went 1-2 with the lineup. But like, I mean, there was a multi-game stretch there where your third, fourth, and fifth best players and third, fourth, and fifth highest paid players on a top-heavy roster construction, right? Because that's the other thing that I think gets lost in this is like the Lakers looking at their salary sheet, like their best players are their highest paid players. And that's not always the case, right? Like sometimes you have guys on rookie scale contracts or, just different situations
bad
where
deals.
maybe a guy, bad deals, etc. Like the Lakers, it's very simple. You look at their salary sheet and the guys making above minimum contracts are the guys that should be playing. And then maybe you slot in like one or two minimum guys in the rotation. But the fact that 3 of those guys were coming off the bench, even though it was only a 2 or 3 game sample, like that's still insane. And that was really the stretch. The Boston game, they got off to that terrible start. They were never really in the game, but they did have some stretches there where they were way more competitive. And I just wonder if we could go back and like redo that stretch, even if they go 5-8 or 6-7, like that's the difference between them right now being the number 9 seed and potentially being the 6th seed, right? So it's just, I think it makes a huge difference. So I had Mo DeKeel of The Athletic and Bleacher Report
Mo's awesome.
last week, and Mo's great. And we got into it though, because he disagreed with me that he didn't think it made a difference. And I guess to like add the context to it, I think it's not just, as you were saying, like it's not just the starting group, it's really the minutes. Like the guy playing 15, 18 minutes a night should have been Taurean Prince, not Rui Hachimura. And Rui should have been the one playing 30 to 35 minutes a night. And I think that shift, when also looking at the lineup data of Rui and Vando next to LeBron and AD, when looking at Taurean being last by a country mile in terms of plus minus off, like just overall for the season, like that stuff adds up. And the fact that the Lakers were routinely having a much worse player play oftentimes double the amount of minutes as one of their best players, like it didn't make sense. And that the other thing too is some people are like, well, revisionist history, you can go back and nitpick the rotation. It's like, no, we were nitpicking this on Hoops Tonight
at the time,
were talking about it. And I remember doing the all wing episode, and we were just like laughing, like what's going on here? And I remember talking to people around the Lakers, and they didn't understand it. So like that, I mean, again, it was only a 3-game stretch there, but like they went 1-2. And every win matters, right? Like the Lakers could not afford to just punt games the way that they did for stretches there in December. So this brings me to the play-in tournament and sort of the path moving forward. So looking at the rest of the West, we just talked about, like, Denver's not a great matchup for LA. We know that. Sacramento has not been historically a great matchup, although they did lose Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter. They just blew a 20-point lead against the Knicks last night. They haven't been playing as well recently. So like, how do you feel about the rest of the West? I know you just mentioned like the Lakers are in that second tier for you with several teams in the West, the Thunder, the Timberwolves, the Clippers, the Mavericks, maybe the Suns. I don't remember exactly your tier, but like, how do you view them in comparison with the rest of the West? And is there any other hypothetical matchup that gives you any pause with them either advancing in the play-in or winning a round or two in the West playoffs.
So the Kings in particular, they were the one team that was like a really bad matchup for the Lakers. I don't think the Kings are as good of a basketball team as the Lakers. I think the Lakers are better than the Kings. It's just a bad matchup, which, by the way, is the same case for all of these teams in that tier. The Kings, for instance, are 0-7 when they play against the Houston Rockets or against the New Orleans Pelicans. Why? Because the Pelicans and Rockets can match their perimeter speed. And because they can match their perimeter speed, they can't be as effective offensively. They get their ass kicked by those teams. So I like, especially now that Malik Monk is out, Kevin Huerter, I actually think Keon Ellis is doing a really nice job in his spot and actually serves a very specific need for them as a point of attack defender. But without Malik Monk, Sacramento to me is no longer even in that group. We're going to talk about Minnesota in OKC in a minute, so I'll hold off on that for now. The Clippers, to me, the Lakers match up really well with the Clippers because they're over the top shooters. And the Lakers struggle with dribble drive guys, but guys that shoot pull up jump shots, they actually do a good job sliding their feet and contesting and forcing them into misses, which I think is a big part of why the Lakers on many occasions have stifled the Clippers offense this year. The Mavs, I just think LeBron and AD would pulverize them inside. The Suns are like the one team that I look at. If I had to pick one team other than Denver that I think would have the Lakers number, it'd be Phoenix. And it's just because of their overall perimeter speed and their ability to really space you out. Now, the Lakers had some success against Phoenix, but it was early in the year when they weren't healthy. I think if the Lakers played the Suns in a series, to me right now, it's a toss-up. And I'd probably lean ever so slightly towards the Suns, but I would give the Lakers a very good chance to win that series. But there's no like major concerning matchup for me with the Lakers in the West anymore. The one team there was the Kings because they had two lightning quick guards that the Lakers could not keep from getting to their spots, which would have absolutely bared out over the course of a series. And then two, they had a Sabonis matchup with Anthony Davis, which has always given him issues. And so, yeah, like Phoenix kind of gives you a little bit of that too, where they have Nurkic who can bother AD on the offensive glass some, but they're once again a pull-up jump shooting team, so the Lakers could bait them into difficult shots. Again, if I had to pick one, I'd say Phoenix, but there's not any real specific matchup in the West that I'm concerned about beyond Denver. What about you?
I'm with you. I look at Phoenix as the team that would give me the most concern as the Lakers. As you mentioned, their 3 wins over the Suns all happened from early December and earlier in the season. So like I think that a win in October, November, and December. But that first like week of December. So since then, the Suns have won twice and really, in my opinion, won rather convincingly against the Lakers. They had the one game in LA where they just shot the shit out of the ball and got up by 20 pretty early and then just rode that to a blowout win. But even that second game with I believe Beal was out, or like the most recent matchup in Phoenix, the Lakers had their starters, no Vando. But the Suns had I think they were only missing Bradley Beal and Eric Gordon was out as well. But like looking at that, I mean again like Nurkic, that was one of his best games of the season. So I don't know how replicable that is in a 7-game series. But like I just think Durant, Booker, I still look like just the way that they play Denver, I think kind of scares me. And I know it's a totally different matchup, but the fact that they took 2 games off the Nuggets last year in the playoffs was a different group, to be clear, but just having to guard Booker and KD in a 7-game series, I think they have some of the elements of the Clippers where it's a lot of over the top jump shooting, but they do have some more speed and athleticism. And I think the Lakers just don't have the one-on-one defense. I mean, we'll see what happens with Vando, but like just the perimeter one-on-one defense, it scares me a little bit in that matchup, more so than it does in some of the other ones. How do you think the Clippers, like the formula of Kawhi Leonard plus Ty Lue in a 7-game series, like we've seen when they've been healthy, and that's a big when, like that just kind of scares me a little bit. I think Ty Lue would figure out ways to slow down LeBron and AD, and big Ivica Zubac has played AD fairly well in like the last few years, and again, like Kawhi is one of the few guys that I think can match LeBron in a potential playoff series, and he's done it a few times in the past. So I think like those are the two teams I look at. Like Dallas is an interesting one because they've been playing so well that I'm like, I know the matchup kind of leans in LA's favor from a physicality and like a paint battle perspective, but Luka and Kyrie have really clicked over the last couple months. They're both playing at very high levels. So Luka might end up winning MVP. We'll see. But I think I know what Lively got injured recently, and I don't know what his status is currently. But like the Lively Gafford pairing, I do see those two as like guys who could give the Lakers some trouble with their backside rotations and just getting lobs and stuff. So like Dallas, it might just come down to like, do they have a really good shooting series, or if they match up in the play-in, do they have one of those nights where they hit 20 plus threes, shoot 40+%, and just hit the Lakers with an avalanche and win. But I would say those are like really the only three teams I would have any concern at beating the Lakers, and I would probably have them in that order of Phoenix, the Clippers, and Dallas. But I mean, we're kind of on the subject of the play-in already, so let's just get into it. Lakers are number 9 right now, and in my opinion, there's a big difference between being number 9 and being number 8, because number 9, single elimination, and yes, you have home court advantage, but you are one Steph Curry 45-point road performance away from your season ending and you not even making the playoffs. And then if you win that matchup, you now go to Phoenix, to Dallas, to New Orleans, to Sacramento, which I think would be the easiest of those four by a solid margin right now. But now you have to go into a single elimination road environment. And again, I think the Lakers have played better on the road recently, but they have not been a good road team this season. So single elimination, like you're going to get the best out of LeBron and AD, but you're also coming off of an emotional, potentially really close first game, and then a couple of days later traveling and now going into a hostile road environment. Now the flip side is if you're in the 7-8, ideally you're 7 and you just host the game, but they'll probably be 8 if they do get into that game. Now you are going on the road for that tough road game, but you either win it and advance, or you lose it and now you get to host the game. And I think that's ideal circumstances for a group that has been much better at home, one of the best home teams in the West this season. So how do you view number 9 versus number 8? You could touch on the matchups if you want, but just from a playoff path perspective, like the Lakers, I think if they stay in number 9, are in real jeopardy of potentially just not even making the playoffs, even with how well they've been playing.
So this current group of play-in teams, the Pelicans, the Kings, the Warriors, and the Lakers, I think that'll be our 4. The main reason why is like Phoenix and Dallas are both just playing really well right now. And Phoenix, like you were talking about, we've been referencing Phoenix as a threat to the Lakers and a threat to Denver, but I personally think Phoenix is the second best team in the East right now. I think that's what their actual playoff translatability is. I think they're like they just ripped through 4 straight top 10 defenses and put up like 119 points per 100 possessions. And obviously they dropped a game on the road to Oklahoma City, but they've been playing really good basketball as of late. I think they're clearly better than all 3 of those teams. I think they're clearly better than the Pelicans. I think they're clearly better than the Kings, clearly better than the Warriors, the Lakers, I mean. And they would be favored in any play-in matchup in any of those situations, regardless home or away. If they were an 8 seed and had to go to New Orleans or to Sacramento, they'd be favored. If they were even if they were the road team going into Golden State, I think they'd be favored. So they're better than those teams. But again, you mentioned it's just single elimination brings a big time variable. And specifically like with a team like Golden State, because the Lakers didn't really address their point of attack defense concerns, and because Jarred Vanderbilt is like I have this feeling like we're going to get a reevaluation on Monday and they're going to say he's out for the season or something like that. Like I'm not super optimistic about him coming back. Maybe he will, maybe he does. But like even looking back at this year, when he came back, he didn't really look like himself for several months after that, because again, what the Lakers need from him is insane foot speed on the perimeter. And it's just going to take a while for him to get back to that level athletically. So Now we're looking at Austin Reeves getting the on-ball assignment against Steph. And Austin has defended extremely well over the course of the past month, and he's really working his butt off, and he's doing the best he can. But Austin can't guard Steph. And all it takes, like you said, now, and what scares me even worse is Steph hasn't been playing well. So it's like Steph more or less over the last couple of months has been a shell of himself. He's barely shooting over 40% from the field. He's shooting like 35% from three and averaging something like 24 points per game in his last I can't remember the exact sample, but it's like basically since the All-Star break. So like he's really struggling. And all it takes is one night where the Lakers are sitting a little too far back in a drop coverage and he gets cooking against Austin Reeves and then you're out. So again, like I think if the Lakers win out, like if they win the next 5 games, I think they have a good chance to get up into that 7-8. But the problem is because the Kings have that tiebreaker, they're just in a really tough spot. The one thing I don't understand is it gets really confusing when you have 3-way ties, because then all of a sudden the Kings Lakers record doesn't matter anymore, and I think they go to Western Conference record, I believe at that point. I'm not
conference record, yeah.
It's so like it might get a little more complicated if it ends up in some sort of 3-way tie. But the problem is too, and this is something I think a lot of people are learning right now, is that these teams in the play-in tournament are all super desperate. And we learned this last year with the Lakers, right? The Lakers needed to win every game. So even when they were playing against teams that were higher up in the standings against them, they were just in a position where they had more urgency. And so they brought more on that given night. So they're able to rep out wins. We're seeing that right now. All the teams at the bottom of the West are like winning the majority of their games right now because they're all terrified of ending up in that bottom half of the play-in bracket. So the Lakers could literally go 4-1 and still be the 9th seed. Like that's still on the table. And so a lot of it is just the reality of their predicament, but there's no doubt that you'd rather be an 8 versus 9. As far as like who they face if they get out, it's just impossible to figure out at this point, because even at the top of the West, all those teams are only separated by like a game. So even if you get the 7, 8, 9, 10, regardless of where you're at there, you really don't know who you're playing in the first round at this point.
So I just looked it up, and the Lakers only have the Western Conference tiebreaker ahead of the Warriors, and that would only apply in a 3-way tie with Golden State and another team, just because that would first go head to head, and then if the Lakers win, that it's basically going to be decided by that April 9th matchup. If the Warriors win, they win the season series. If the Lakers win, they win it. But in a 3-way situation, the Lakers don't have the conference tiebreaker over any of the 8 teams ahead of them. So if they do end up tying with, say, Sacramento and New Orleans, the Lakers would end up being 9. So that's where it's just a little trick, because again, like we've seen it. I mean, I look at the Golden State game from a few weeks ago, where all it takes is one poke to the eye of Anthony Davis and you lose the game, right? Like your margin for error is just non-existent in a single elimination format. And of course, that's a bit of a dramatic example, but someone gets in foul trouble. Someone like we've seen, I look at that Sacramento performance on the road where LeBron, AD, and D'Lo start 5 for 22 in that game through like the first 3 quarters. And it's like, if you have one of those stinkers on the road, your season's over. So the Lakers have just eliminated any margin for error here, over the not only the next few games to round out the season, but in a potential play-in situation, like you have to win. And it's for a team that we can probably count their notable road wins on one hand, like that gives me a little bit of pause in a single elimination road environment. But obviously we'll see here in the next couple of weeks. But you alluded to Minnesota and OKC. So again, I think we're in agreement. Like Denver's a really tough matchup. I think they would be heavy favorites over the Lakers in a 1-8 or 2-7 matchup. But if there are 2 other teams in the mix right now, and the Lakers actually kind of control their destiny a little bit, just because I view the Lakers Timberwolves game on Sunday as a bit of a win-win for the Lakers, because if they win, they increase their odds of getting into the 7-8 game and having a shot to jump up to 7, while also knocking the Timberwolves down, in the pecking order to increase the odds of them being number 2 and pushing Denver to number 1. But then if they lose, the Lakers also marginally increase their odds of being number 8, just because they'd likely be in the 9 game. And then if they win that, they could only be number 8. And they also pushed Minnesota ahead of Denver with another win, hypothetically, again, depending on how those two teams respectively close out the season. So, like, in a weird way, the Lakers and Timberwolves playing when they are is sort of a win-win for the Lakers, in that either direction you can make a case, it kind of increases their odds of facing Minnesota. Obviously, for them, they want to win. They'd rather be a 2-7 matchup, just avoid Denver entirely from a bracket perspective. But like, with Minnesota and OKC, OKC Lakers won the season series 3-1. Minnesota currently leads at 2-1, but one of those games was without LeBron. Now, in Minnesota's defense, one of those losses was no Cat, no Rudy Gobert. We've heard different things on Cat. It sounded like he wasn't going to be back for the first round, and maybe would be back later in the playoffs if the Timberwolves went on a run. Now, Shams Charania recently reported that he could be back by the end of the regular season. Only a few games left, so we will get some clarity here. Lakers' luck would be Cat comes back Sunday. Like, that's the most Lakers outcome possible, as Cat comes back and drops like 35 on them. But with that context of just the season series with OKC, season series with Minnesota, like, how do you view those two matchups? I think a lot of people would pick the Lakers over both teams. Are you in that same camp? Where are you at with those two matchups? And just, if the Lakers are able to draw one of those in round one, would you pick them over them?
So I want to say this with the appropriate amount of respect. I respect that OKC and Minnesota have dominated the regular season the way that they have, and I would not be surprised if those two teams knocked out the Lakers. That said, I would pick the Lakers in a series against both of them. I think Oklahoma City is going to run the league soon. I don't think people even realize how good Jalen Williams is yet. I think he has the chance to be better than Shea. That's how good I think Jalen Williams is. He legitimately is the best combination of like downhill force and speed, legitimate dead-eye shot making, and playmaking that I've seen from a wing prospect in a very, very long time. Like, he has a chance to be like a better version of Jimmy Butler. I almost view him, with the way he can get people on their heels, he almost reminds me of like a taller Russell Westbrook, who's a better decision maker and a better shooter. Like, that's the potential he has. And he's in his second season right now. Like, people, like, he's so insanely good, it's not even funny. And then Chet could very well end up being, one of the top 3 centers in the league here in a few years. So like that's the type of potential Oklahoma City has. But right now, they're small, they're young. I think the Lakers would just physically overwhelm them. Minnesota, all year long, even when they're healthy, I've seen them as a team that's extremely vulnerable to playoff basketball. The dead giveaway is their crunch time situation. They have it's actually crazy. They have a 104 offensive rating in clutch situations, 104, which is like absolutely atrocious.
That's
And
terrible.
they've been substantially worse defensively in clutch time than they have been over the course of the entirety of the regular season, because as good as they are defensively, they have entry points. You can attack Mike Conley. You can attack Karl Towns if you can get him in space. They're a little bit like Denver, where they have excellent defensive personnel at specific positions, but when you really spread them out, you can expose some of their weaker links. Also with Minnesota, I'm really concerned about their decision making, even when they're healthy. Just straight up, do you trust Ant and Cat to consistently get like the best shot, 10 half court possessions in a row, the way you can with some of these other teams? So again, I have the appropriate amount of respect for those two teams, but in the playoff context, I'd pick the Lakers over both of them. I would view the Suns and the Clippers both as bigger threats to beat the Lakers than those two teams.
Yeah. The only thing I have to add on that is I think OKC, in going back and watching some of the film on the OKC Lakers matchups and diving through the box scores and just OKC's season long numbers, they have shot uncharacteristically poor against the Lakers on threes. And a lot of those looks have been high percentage, wide open looks that they've just missed. And there is something to like the Lakers kind of forcing them into being a higher volume 3-point shooting team. And we've seen them also do that somewhat against Denver. And Denver's like the exact opposite, where they take more threes and they just make a lot of them against the Lakers. They did that a lot in the conference finals. But with OKC, my one concern with the season series going 3-1, and I'm being reductive here, so I understand like that there's a lot of elements to it, but like if OKC, I think they shot under 33 or under 34% in 3 of the 4 games, all 3 losses. And if they shoot even 37, 38%, which is below their season long numbers, like I think they potentially win one of those games. It's a 2-2 season series, and we're talking about it. Like there's a difference optically in like 3-1 versus 2-2, right? Like 3-1, it sounds like the Lakers have just dominated them, and they have dominated them in stretches, and they've had some really good halves and quarters against
where they take
the
big
Thunder.
leads.
Yeah, they take the big lead, and like remember like OKC got off to that big lead. I think they were up like what 16-18 or something, maybe 14 in the first quarter against the Lakers. Lakers storm back and they win that one by double digits and win it rather convincingly. So like
the Laker lost too. They took a big lead. The one they lost, the
Yeah.
first one, it was like the tail end of a long road trip. The Lakers jumped them early, and then the Thunder just kind of regained control over towards the end with just their speed.
And that might have been a back-to-back, if I'm not mistaken, or
Yeah,
like
it was.
like 3 games in 4 nights, something like that. So like I would say the Lakers, based on the season series, like have looked like the better team, and I also would pick them to beat. I think I would pick the Lakers in 6 against either team. It would kind of be similar, in my opinion, to like the Memphis series, where LA comes in, takes game 1, probably lose game 2, and then you sweep the home games, and the home team wins game 5. So like that's how I would view it. I do think though that with OKC's dribble penetration and the shooting, like if they have a really good, like if they shoot their season averages of like close to 40% on threes for a series, that's like the one way I see the Lakers potentially losing, just because they continue to not be a great 3-point defense. And I thought there were stretches even against the Raptors and the Wizards. Like the Wizards got off to a crazy hot start in that game, but like just in general, like the Lakers 3-point defense still concerns me a little bit, and that's where I look at a matchup against an OKC team or a Dallas team or the Clippers, like teams that take either shoot threes at a high level or take a bunch of threes or both, as like that's potentially the recipe for the Lakers. Is they have been shooting the 3 really well for several months now. I mean, on the season, I think they're top 6, top 7 in terms of percentage, but they've remained a bottom 3-point shooting team in terms of attempts. So in a hypothetical shootout, like, yeah, the Lakers might shoot 45% from 3 on a given night, but like they're still probably taking 30 to 35 attempts, where if they're playing a team taking 40 to 50 attempts and that team shoots 38 to 42%, even though they're shooting not as well, they're probably making more threes than the Lakers. And then it comes into like the free throw battle and turnovers, offensive rebounds, all that stuff. So like, I guess what I'm saying is like, I think OKC has a better shot than people are giving them credit. I do think to me, it's closer to a 50-50 series than it is to being like the way people talk about it, it's like a 70-30 series. And I don't think it's that decisive. That said, I still would pick the Lakers. Minnesota, I think, is more in LA's favor. Like they played Minnesota tough without LeBron. I think the way AD dominate, like he's not going to dominate Rudy Gobert in the same fashion, but I just don't think Minnesota's strengths, like Minnesota is bigger than most teams. They don't have that same advantage over the Lakers. Now they do negate some of the Lakers' paint scoring and rebounding and some of the things that the Lakers have been succeeding with lately. But I just, as you kind of said, like there's an unserious nature to the Timberwolves with the combination of Ant, who's still figuring things out. He's 22, like he's going to continue to get better. But Cat and Rudy, like that trio as just the top of my roster, I have some concern with, and it could blow up in my face that they could go on a run and like this gets clipped and I look like an idiot. But like I think there's like an unserious nature to the Timberwolves that concerns me for them in a playoff series. So I think that one I have more confidence in, like maybe a 60-40 series in favor of the Lakers.
Really quickly on the Thunder, shooting luck is a thing, and there's no doubt watching those games that the Thunder didn't shoot as well as they could have. That said, like there is something to be said, and I've experienced this personally in my time playing the game too. Like the more physical the game, the harder it is to shoot. Just simple matter of fact. And, when the Lakers play really physically imposing basketball, which they do against the Thunder, like they go out of their way against the Thunder to bully them inside. They know that's their advantage, and for the record, that's not just a Thunder thing. The Lakers have been consistently, I want to say they're second on the season in points in the paint per 100 possessions. They're a consistent paint attacking team. And that doesn't even count the fact that a free throw that's earned near the basket does not count as points in the paint. So like the Lakers are both a high volume point in the paint team and a team that gets to the foul line a lot. And so because of that, like there's something to be said about just kind of disrupting OKC's rhythm and making them uncomfortable just with the sheer level of physicality they bring to the table. Again, I do expect in a 7-game series for the Thunder to shoot better than they had. And I agree with you. I would view it much closer to a toss-up than I would a dominant pick. But I do think that there's something to be said about it just being a bad matchup for the Thunder in the sense that they're kind of like a finesse type of perimeter-oriented, transition-oriented team. And the Lakers are a relentless paint attacking team that can wear them down into some of their worse like shooting potential results. But yeah, I think it's important. I like that you pointed that out because it's true. The Thunder, like Chet was not making his pick and pop threes. You know, like they weren't hitting the same amount of jump shots that they typically do. Also, the Lakers tend to defend without fouling really well, which is an advantage against a guy like Shea, who's a little bit of a grifter.
I mean, you touched on like the Lakers offense. I think it's been incredible now for several months, and they excel in getting to the rim and finishing, drawing fouls, and making their open threes. And like that's just a recipe for like that. That's why they basically become unguardable because like how like you're giving something up at some point. Like if you're not overloading to the paint, you're giving up a three. And if you are now cheating over to an Austin, a D'Lo, or even a Rui who's shot the ball, was over 50% on threes for the road trip. Like now all of a sudden they have that sliver of space. Well, LeBron, AD, they're getting downhill and they're either finishing or they're getting fouled. So like the Lakers offense has become such a problem now where like there are very few teams that I think have the personnel to actually like match up with them and slow them down. Unfortunately for the Lakers, one of those teams is Denver. And just like they've been able to kind of bother the Lakers. Like Aaron Gordon from a physicality perspective is one of the few guys who I think can match LeBron's just overall strength and size and athleticism and speed. Like he's one of the few guys who can just at least bother LeBron a little bit. And then Jokic is like AD's been able to do what he wants, but they can force him into being a jump shooter. And then it's just a matter of if he makes it or not. But one guy that we've kind of danced around during this conversation and you've touched on him a bit is Jarred Vanderbilt. And to me, like this might be the X factor for the Lakers the rest of the way in terms of just like they don't have a guy who can replicate what Vando does from his point of attack defense to just his defensive versatility to take on multiple matchups, switch across 1 through 4, maybe even 1 through 5, depending. Like, you know, if you put him on a Chet, I think he'd be fine for the most part. So like that piece of Vando and his length, his athleticism, his size, his defense, his energy, his effort, his rebounding, offensive rebounding. Lakers had started to figure out how to use him. Like it's just such a big piece where outside of the 5 starters, he's right there in terms of importance. And you could maybe even make a case he's the 5th most important Laker or even 4th if you really want to, just given that the overlap with Austin and D'Lo, you can maybe make the case he's more important than having both of them. But like that's a different topic for a different day. So Vando's being set to be reevaluated early next week. We don't have clarity whether that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but the Lakers have 2 games this weekend, so that's going to rule him out for at least 2 more games. They play Golden State on Tuesday. I've heard different things. Like one thing I know for certain, he's not returned to contact yet. He has not been even ramping up his conditioning yet in terms of doing a lot of like on-court running and different things. So like, it does sound like he's still at least like a weekish away in like an optimistic sense. So that would put him at potentially returning either at Memphis or at New Orleans on the early side. But for hypothetical sake, let's just say Vando does come back. And you did say you would start him. So like I'm giving you the floor here. Like, so you would start him, bring Rui off the bench like game 1, or would you give him a couple games? Or like, how would you go about reintegrating Jarred Vanderbilt if he does end up coming back potentially in like a must-win game against the Pelicans or in the play-in or in round 1? Like, how do you kind of adjust for the context of when he's coming back and also acknowledging when he did come back previously, he did not have rhythm out the gate. And he was not able to impact games right away. Like, how do you factor all that in when trying to reintegrate him?
Yeah, again, the idea of starting him would be if it's Jarred Vanderbilt, the Jarred Vanderbilt we saw back in January. I just think I'm a big believer in starting your best defender on the opposing star to set the tone from the start of a game. For instance, Jarred Vanderbilt's really the only guy on the Lakers roster that can credibly guard Luka. And that's a super important kind of dynamic because like the Mavs, we haven't really talked about much today, but the Mavs are a team that they have some guys that if you force them to shoot, they can miss. Like if you make Derek Jones Jr. shoot, he'll miss a bunch of them. If you make PJ Washington shoot, he'll miss a bunch of them. If you make Maxi Kleber shoot, he'll miss a bunch of them. They have some guys that you can tilt the defense towards, but Luka is one of those unique talents that he can just go up the floor and play iso ball and make it really hard for you to double team him as opposed to when you call a screen and you can blitz. But the only way that you can get Luka to really consistently call for screens is if you have a really good on-ball defender that can bother him enough to where he wants to screen. We just saw this in the Golden State game the other night where Andrew Wiggins did such a good job on Luka that they had to keep calling for ball screens, which allowed them to kind of blitz and recover. I find Jarred Vanderbilt to be essentially a prerequisite for the Lakers to have any real chance of beating the best teams in the league. And so from there, like, yeah, you probably start him on the bench in smaller minutes until he gets his legs underneath him. But if he reaches a point where he looks at Vando or looks like Vando again, I'd start him on the opposing best player, and then essentially just keep Rui at his current minutes load and just have him play in different portions of the game. But like, it's just to me like when you actually go down the Lakers roster as we look at some of the matchups that we've talked about today, like even just Denver, Jarred Vanderbilt didn't play in any of the Denver games. And like you talked about the Laker offense, like I thought like D'Lo didn't play in the last Denver game either. And in that first half, the offense looked pretty good. A big difference in that 5-out approach. And like Jarred Vanderbilt, when we were playing 4-out, they'd set a ball screen, with two guys in the corners and a guy on the opposite wing, and it would be Jarred Vanderbilt just sitting in that corner. Whereas in the 5-out, it's like there's so much more ball and player movement that he's just much harder to guard or much more difficult to account for. He can be more impactful as a cutter and as an offensive rebounder. And so I view him as a prerequisite. If he's healthy and able to go and actually at a level where he's being as impactful as he usually is, I would start him. But again, it's the counterpoint there would be continuity and rhythm. And the starting group is just killing everybody. And so I think it's completely defensible to keep Jarred Vanderbilt on the bench, even if he's healthy, because of the way Rui's playing and the way that group is. I just think you run into some issues if, let's say, for instance, Jarred Vanderbilt's healthy and ready to go for the play-in game. Like he plays in like 2 regular season games at the end. I'd want to start him on Steph. I would not want Steph to get 2 easy threes in the opening minutes on Austin Reeves because he can shake free on him. And then suddenly Steph is just giant bulging eyes throwing the basketball into the ocean kind of thing, right? Like I'd want to set the tone on him. If the Lakers ended up in a series against Denver, I would want to start him on Jamal Murray on the opening tip to make him uncomfortable from the start. I just think when you really look at that, Austin is the best perimeter defender in that starting lineup, and Austin's done an admirable job. But that's not what he's most gifted at, right? So like again, I would personally start him if he was healthy. I think it's completely defensible to keep him on the bench though, as long as his minutes are so big.
I think it comes down to again the circumstance of like if he's coming back Memphis or New Orleans, I don't think you start him right away. I think you got to give him at least a game or two to really feel out where he's at. But then you hit on it. Like I lean more on the continuity side of just this lineup. It's basically been the only Lakers lineup that has had continuity this season, other than the abysmal starting lineup of Torian in Rui's place. And that lineup has been a net negative for most of the season. It's actually played a little bit better in recent, hasn't played as much in general, but like in a few recent games that it had played in, it had been a little bit better from like a plus minus perspective. But like overall, the Lakers don't have a lot of continuity with their lineups. And I think that starting group and just how unguardable they've been for basically 2 months now, I think I would want to stick with that. And in general, I do think the Lakers, like you need a baseline level of defense, right? And I think to go on any type of playoff run, you can't really have a weakness on either side of the ball. But the Lakers have been winning with their offense. I think that this is like the actualized like ceiling of the group is on the offensive end in terms of just like I think their best players trend more offensive than defensive, and they're leaning into that. And that's like, so yes, I think there are certain matchups where you are going to need Vando. Like if you're playing Dallas in a 7-game series, you're going to need Vando. If you're playing Golden State, and at this point they'd only play them in the play-in, like you're going to, or I guess, they could get 7 and whatever. But like, if you're playing like certain matchups, yes, you need Vando, but I think they can get away with starting this group and then quickly adjusting where like, minute 9, minute 8, you bring in Vando for, maybe D'Lo starts like 0 for 3 and you sub him out quickly and you go a little bit bigger, or you just do the simple substitution of subbing him in for Rui or whatever. Like you can figure it out on the fly. But like, I think that's the one thing where I just look at this group actually has continuity, and I wouldn't necessarily want to go away from it. But if you give it a game or two in a series and the starters just can't defend the opposing starting group, then like I do think, similar to the way that they adjusted in the Denver series, you have to make that adjustment. And that's where I could see Vando immediately kind of going in like a game 2 or a game 3 of, okay, we just need him out there. Continuity be damned. But this brings us to our last
really quick follow up. Sorry. You remember when you talked earlier about how like the Lakers offenses looked good without LeBron?
Yeah.
A big part of that, in my opinion, is that starting lineup just has an insane amount of offensive skill. Like Austin, in my opinion, even though his numbers obviously haven't quite been what they were in the postseason last year, but his numbers have been really good over the course of the last few months. Austin, I think, is a better basketball player than he was last year. I think D'Lo is unquestionably a better basketball player than he was last year. LeBron James is unquestionably a better basketball player than he was last year. I think Rui is a better basketball player than he was last year. Anthony Davis is more or less the same, but he has shown improvement in the post in terms of his ability to manage double teams. So like everyone's better. Everyone's really good offensively. So like when you slot LeBron James out, they can still score. They can still score because Austin's really good. D'Lo's really good. AD's really good. Rui's really good. That's kind of the way I feel about the Jarred Vanderbilt piece. I agree with you. This Lakers ceiling has to do with offense, which is so bizarre compared to what we've seen from other Laker teams. It's truly bizarre because from 2019 to 2023 was the exact opposite. It was all about what they could do defensively. Even last year, remember, it was like they're the second best defense post trade deadline. Like defense. They strangled Memphis. They strangled Golden State. That's what they did, right? And like this year, it's all about the offensive end. So like to me, you can actually take Rui out, at least from that specific lineup, and insert Jarred Vanderbilt and experience a gigantic improvement defensively with only a slight decline offensively because there's still so much offensive skill in that group. And so that's the case for it. But to be clear, you're right. Like you don't tweak something that's working this well. It's more just if you get down the line and Jared's healthy and maybe you drop game 1 against, let's say, OKC, because Austin's getting barbecued by Shea, then I wouldn't hesitate to be like, hey, we got to put Jarred in the starting lineup. That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah, well, it's wild too that I just kind of had a flashback of like, I mean, it was like a couple of months ago when people were talking. Remember that it kind of the narrative came out of like, why have the Lakers never had a top 10 offense with LeBron and AD? And
Yeah.
Like, can you build a competent offense around those two in 2024? And like now it's kind of become the inverse of that, where I think all the questions for me, for the most part, with this group are more so on the defensive end. And a big part of that is Vando and his ability to come back and eventually assume like a 25 to 35 minute a night role. But if he can't, then like I don't know if they have the defensive personnel to go on a deep run. Like I think they could win a round. Second round would probably depend on just like the matchups and if they can get by. But like the defensive end to me has been really the big concern over the last couple months of just not having enough plus defenders overall. And like AD can only put out so many fires. And if you have an elite enough offense with enough playmaking, enough shooting, enough over the top shot making, and a really high level tactician as a head coach who can kind of play with the spots that AD's on the floor, Like that's where I view a team can expose the Lakers defensively. But this brings us to our last question, which is the ideal playoff rotation. And so let's do one version with Vando, one version without Vando. The Lakers, I don't think have like I think there's more depth on this roster than last year. So like last year it was more of an 8-man rotation, sometimes even 7. I think by the end of that Denver series, it was basically the starters plus. I mean, Vando was basically done in terms. Like I don't remember if he played even in Game 4. D'Lo played like 14 minutes, and I want to say there's someone else I'm forgetting, but like the Lakers basically had a 7-man rotation by the end of the Denver series, and maybe they get back to that place again. How do you view a 9-man rotation with Vando, without Vando, come playoff time?
So much of it has to do with like the matchup. So for instance, like
Sure.
if you're playing Denver's not going to play a backup center. So you can get away with a LeBron Rui kind of front court for an AD off type of lineup. Whereas like there might be a different opponent that you run into where you want to play Jackson Hayes, maybe one shift per half for a little bit. That said, like I really do view this as a really short rotation when they get to the postseason, simply because I think the Lakers have found their core 5, right? It's Rui, Austin, D'Lo, LeBron, and AD. There's a version of this where they just scale those guys up and all 5 of them play 44 minutes in a game 6. You know what I mean? Like that's a real thing that could happen, right? So I do think it'll get shrunk. If I had to do a 8-man rotation that does not include Jarred Vanderbilt, that does not include Jackson Hayes, meaning like what I would go with against Denver, I'd go LeBron, AD, Austin, D'Lo, Rui, and then I'd go Spencer, and I'd go Gabe and Torian. I think that those are just your 3 best basketball players that are not in the starting 5 that don't include Jarred Vanderbilt. I agree with you. If Jarred Vanderbilt gets added in there, I'm probably taking Torian out. If I go to a 9th-man rotation, I'm including both Torian and Vando at that point. And again, what you probably do if there's a matchup that dictates Jackson Hayes being on the floor, and Jackson Hayes, it's been so up and down with him this year because when his motor is going and he's getting offensive rebounds and he's running the floor super well, I actually think he's been pretty impactful. But then there are other times when like when the game really slows down and he gets caught defending pick and roll a lot, he can commit fouls and get out of position a lot and cause some problems on that, and not a outstanding defensive rebounder, right? So like a lot of that just has to depend on matchups. And if I'm playing Jackson, I think I remove Gabe at that point because I've used Spencer and Gabe as somewhat redundant. Spencer's kind of an interesting guy because like I could see him closing games in place of Rui when the Lakers do need a better perimeter defender. I would love to see Spencer Dinwiddie try to guard Jamal Murray in a really intense type of playoff environment because he can kind of match up with him athletically in a way that and from size compared to some of these other guys. I think Spencer could very well end up being the 6th man when we get into the postseason. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think he's kind of at that point now. Like if Vando comes back, I would slot him more as the 7th guy. But right now, Spencer's the guy I have the most confidence in off the bench.
But yeah, that's more or less the way I'd look at it: is Spencer, Torian, and Gabe plus or minus Vando for your depending on whether or not he's healthy. But those, I think you just got to go with your best guys. And Gabe is just a guy who's got a ton of playoff experience. Spencer is a guy who can compete athletically. Torian, I think, is just fine when he's playing 2 or 3 shifts in the bench portions of the game. And Jarred Vanderbilt to me is their best perimeter defender. So those are the 4 guys. What about you?
We're pretty similar. I have 7 locks, and my 7 locks are the 5 starters plus Spencer and Gabe. For me, looking at Vando would be an 8th lock, and again, I said he slot to me as like the 6th man technically, or 6 most minutes overall after the 5 starters, and maybe you play him even more depending on the matchup. But I look at if we're going 8 with Vando, then it's just those 8. If we're going 9 with Vando, I view Torian and Jackson as like, to me, those are like the flexible or like the pivot point of the rotation in terms of like the matchup. So maybe you're playing a Dallas where they're going Lively and Gafford, for 48 minutes there at center. And for the 4 to 8 minutes Anthony Davis is off the floor, you want Jackson Hayes there. And it's just basically, just hold down the fort for those 4 to 8 minutes. And then maybe it's a matchup, like you said, Denver, or like maybe Phoenix doesn't play a backup center, and they just go Nurkic for 36 to 40 minutes a night. And the rest of the time they're going like KD at the 5 or something. And like, then I think you go Torian as that 9th man, or 8th man in the situation that Vando's out. So to me, I'm with you. Like it comes down to matchups and just sort of like Torian's probably the default option. Now, I do think his minutes should be scaled down even from where they are currently, right? And part of that's just playing the starters more, playing Rui, Austin, D'Lo more. Like I view Torian more as like an 8 to 12 minute a night guy in the playoffs. And again, there might be some matchups or games where he just doesn't play altogether. Like I do have a little bit of a concern of like, is Torian like the 6th man or the 7th man? And look, he has been playing fewer minutes, and Spencer has consistently been playing over him, playing more, closing games. So like, I do think the coaching staff has started to kind of figure out that like top 6 at least. But with Vando potentially coming back, like if it comes down to Gabe versus Torian, I'd rather lean on the guy who started for the team that made the finals and was the team's primary offseason addition. And like, yes, he's technically smaller, but he has a pedigree of performing well in big games. I think he provides a need there as a point of attack defender. And again, don't overcomplicate it. Like this was the guy that you brought in to be the Dennis replacement. We know how important Dennis was last season. And part of that has, like, Spencer has addressed some of that. So I don't like, there's some overlap there, but I just think between Gabe and Torian, I'd rather lean on Gabe. Play the guy you signed to a 3-year, $39 million deal. Like play that guy. Don't play the guy on a $4.5 million contract. So I guess where I'm getting, like, I think there's a little bit of a difference between like what I would do versus what the coaching staff is probably going to do, but we'll see. But I think it should be Jackson versus Torian for most matchups where, like, do you need the extra wing and the extra shooter, or do you need the size and the athleticism? And to your point about Jackson, like I look at the Toronto and Washington games where Toronto, he has this insane putback and he's where he falls. I thought he got concussed or knocked out momentarily. Has like the East Bay funk dunk, and like that's the Jackson that has excelled for the Lakers, where like just devastating in transition as a roller, active on the offensive glass, and just that guy putting constant pressure on the rim with his rolling and his cutting and his putbacks and rebounding and stuff. Then I look at the Washington game. He has 3 points, 0 rebounds, and the Lakers are outscored by 24 points in his 9 minutes. So like they get absolutely destroyed with Jackson on the floor. The Wizards go on 2 runs with him on the floor, and he almost single-handedly, not him, but like his minutes basically, like the Lakers get destroyed. So it's like, it kind of depends on the night. Now I will say overall, like he's been better, and I kind of might even lean Jackson in general over Torian to kind of keep with the size and the rebounding and the athleticism that the Lakers have played better with. But again, it kind of comes down to the matchup, and like if KD's at the 5 and you have Jackson Hayes out there, I think you are potentially setting him up to fail, where if it's a more traditional big man, go with Jackson and don't overthink it.
Well, to your point too, like so much of this is going to be about playing the right notes at the right times based on the right matchups. And I just don't have a ton of confidence in Darvin about that. Darvin, I've seen just like he has his biases in the sense that like when Torian is playing well, he'll lean heavy into his minutes instead of like he has his like predispositions to want to do those sorts of things. And he also has a predisposition to want to play small, which is why like I do think we'll see a lot of Gabe, even though there's a case to be made that he probably shouldn't play as much. But I'm with you. I think like Spencer too, like Spencer's been their best plus minus guy really all season, although in a much smaller sample size. I think Spencer should more or less play Torian's role. I know he doesn't shoot as well, but he does everything else better than Torian does, in my opinion. He's a better passer, he's a better driver, he's a better defensive player. Like he's even a more impactful athlete just on the floor than Torian is. But I do think there's room for him there, just in really small spurts. And again, like I do think this ends. And one thing I'll give Darvin credit for, I remember thinking through 5 games of the Memphis series last year, I was like, what is this guy doing? And then in game 6, I thought he played the right guys in that game 6 at home when it was time to get a win. And I do think when push comes to shove, they'll just scale those 5 guys minutes way up and you'll see them all play. You'll see Austin, D'Lo, LeBron, and AD play mid 40s. And you'll see, Rui stay around 35, and you'll see like Spencer get in that like 20 range, and like they'll go like the 6.5 man rotation when it comes down to it. I would not be the least bit surprised.
You've talked me into that now, because again, I was saying entering this conversation, like there's more depth on this roster than I think there was last year. Like they had completely given up on Malik Beasley and Troy Brown and Wenyen Gabriel, and like I mean Tristan Thompson got reps against Jokic in the Denver series.
I would love to have Tristan now. Like oh man.
By the way, I just remembered
big body.
Yeah, and yeah, I think he's had some decent stretches for like that was the one position, and I ideally you got someone better than Tristan Thompson, but like that was kind of my case for Biyombo this offseason, of just like once they signed Jackson Hayes, I was sort of like looking at Hayes' strengths. The one thing you need is a more like defensive minded bruiser who could just
bulkier.
And give you 4 to 6 fouls in like 6 to 10 minutes. And
like a Xavier Tillman. Xavier Tillman to me would have been like the ideal backup 5.
But I just remembered during this conversation, game 1 against Denver, the Lakers started Dennis, Austin, and D'Lo next to LeBron and AD.
Yeah, that's right, because Austin was guarding MPJ and just getting shot over. Remember that?
Yes. So that's where like to your like. They did figure things out. I think it was at times a little slower than it should have been. Like it took game 4 for D'Lo to get benched. Eventually Vando was out of the rotation. Like some of the adjustments in that Denver series in particular were a little slow. So, maybe the coaching staff learned from that. And again, like it took them 50 plus games to get to this point with the rotation. And I think they're in a pretty solid place. I don't really have many qualms with it. I think maybe at times like, I would like to see Max play, but like he's not going to be in the playoff rotation, so it doesn't really matter, I guess, at this point.
And he shouldn't be.
And he shouldn't be. But looking at it, like I think they got to this point. It took a bit longer, and that's maybe the X factor. Like Vando's return is a big piece of it, but like, can they continue to push the right buttons in a given series and do it quickly enough? That would be like my one thing. Where looking at the Memphis series, looking at even parts of the Golden State series, like they probably should have gone away from Rui earlier than they did in that series. That just was not a Rui series. Then the Denver series, again, kind of starting Dennis from game 1 and then not going back. Like he outplayed D'Lo in that series. He just shouldn't have been starting at the 3 or at the 2, whatever. So we'll see. Like that's the other thing within all this is like, can they push the right buttons when it comes down to it? And within a series, adjust in game 2 versus adjusting in game 4.
Yeah. What you're trying to say is bullying has worked with Darvin. It's just taken a while every time, which is unfortunate.
Well, that brings us back to the starting lineup. But Jason, you've been far too kind with your time. I really appreciate it. Where can the people? So I assume if you're watching this, you've probably seen me on Hoops Tonight. You probably follow Hoops Tonight. If you have not, definitely check it out. You should be subscribed for those watching on YouTube. But Jason, where can people find you? Where can they find your work? And is there anything you want to plug?
So obviously the YouTube channel Hoops Tonight, our podcast feed Hoops Tonight, on Twitter @_JasonLT. We did just start doing film through a new kind of service.
I saw the Pacers one that you did. Yeah.
Yeah, we just started doing film, and shout out to Ryan. He did an amazing job coming up with ironically through StreamYard, very similar to what we're doing right now, a way for me to kind of like actually annotate live as we're going. And we've done, I think, 2 episodes like that so far, and I'm loving it because it's given me so much more flexibility to kind of demonstrate things. So make sure you check that stuff out. And then obviously we're going to be having Jovan on throughout the Lakers postseason run, so you guys will see him on there too.
I just got to say, like, Jason is one of the best people doing this. I remember picking his brain before the season as I told him, like, I wanted to start getting into YouTube and doing more on camera stuff at home. And I've been slowly building out my home studio, but a big shout out to Jason and the Volume for helping me along the way and bringing me on. And I've had a lot of fun the last 6 months, and I'm looking forward to keeping it going for another 6 months and beyond. So thank you again, Jason, for just want to give you your flowers because, again, I think you're one of the best people doing this. So this was a fun episode. This is my longest episode, which makes sense because we can talk about the Lakers for hours. But for Jason, I'm Jovan Buha. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.